Hello. I've been asked by a number of people, Ed, Sean, Shad and Nadia, you know who you are, to show you the kind of process that I go through when I give my weekly reading on the blog every Sunday. So I bow to pressure from my audience. I can only resist for so long. I bow to pressure so that I can show you the kind of process I go through. So this is going to be a walkthrough, a discussion first of all, to tell you what kinds of things that I'll be using. Then I'm going to show you how I do the casting, and then I will show you the interpretation. Now obviously this is going to be a video reading therefore for Sunday the 6th of September 2015, and it's going to last for the coming week, and therefore you can get a feel for what's happening with the flow for you in that time period. Obviously your specific details will vary, just like any other casting that we do. This is a general casting and you will need to interpret it in the light of whatever circumstances that you've got currently around in your life. So what we're going to need is therefore the casting cloth. We have a 12-sided die, which is going to help us decide which are the houses that the geomes are going to go in. And I also have my faithful gemstones, which I use to decide which house the geome rests in. The gemstones themselves are markers of both the geome itself and the planetary influence. So for example, if I take out the amethyst, I know that this is acquisitio, and I also know therefore, because of the colour deliberately chosen, to remind me that it is associated with Jupiter, the Emperor's purple, and likewise with all the other gemstones. This is very useful because the gemstones themselves I'm not using for any gem principles. They are purely and simply acting here as markers of the geomantic influence and the astrological influence. So what I'm going to do is to I've actually already got the question in mind that I want to ask, but I've kind of pre-formulated that question, but I'm going to refresh myself on that question holding the gemstones, and I'm going to draw out two gemstones and then know which house they're to go in by a casting of the die. So the process is going to look like this. Take the gemstone. To do the casting itself, what I do is to make sure that the clearly formulated question with the time limit, so it's going from today and for the coming week, is formulated clearly in my mind, and I then draw out, in this particular case for the weekly reading, just two gemstones. If it was any other kind of reading, such as a character reading, or wanted to explore a particular issue for someone, then obviously I can use more geomes to understand the factors that are happening around that particular situation. But just for a weekly casting, two geomes are quite enough, together with the calculation of the active transform, to see where the flow is going to go. So what I like to do is to formulate the question and hold the gemstones at the same time. So I make sure that all the gemstones are out of the bag, and I then think of my question and, having got that clearly in mind, I then return the gemstones to the bag. And I want to make sure that the die is included in the question, and I then roll the die between my hands until such time as I feel impelled to stop and reveal which house the first gemstone is to go into. Okay, and that you won't be able to see it very easily on the video, but that's in the 6th house. So I then reach into the bag, take out the first gemstone, which is Amicio, and that's going to go into the 6th house. I then cast again with the die. Again, now it's in the 5th house. 5th house there. And I take out the second gemstone, which is Karcher. Karcher, the gemstone associated with the planet Saturn, and that's going to be in the 5th house. Now it's not too difficult to see that these are only one house apart, 30 degrees apart, so the flow is travelling in this direction. It's travelling anti-clockwise, so it's going to go in the 4th house. This is the next house along. Okay, so to simply find out where the active transform is going to be, I then simply add up the number of houses. Say for example, Karcher had been in the 4th house instead of in the 5th house, then this would have been 2 houses apart, so the active transform would be 2 houses further in that direction. If Karcher had been over here in the 10th house, for example, and this had been the first gemstone drawn, then the active transform will be 1, 2, 3, 4 houses further on. 1, 2, 3, 4th, and the active transform in that situation would have been in the 2nd house. So we know it's going to be in that house. Here's how we calculate the active transform. Now I'm going to do this upside down as far as I'm concerned, but hopefully you can see this quite clearly. This is Amicio. This is in our 6th house position, and we have to add that to Karcher, which is in our 5th house position. Now, how we calculate the active transform is simply by adding these two geomes. Okay. So, if we add a single and a single, we get a double, and I'll say more about that in a moment. If we add a double and a double, we get another 2 and 2 is 4, so we get another even number of dots, which is 2 dots. If we add a single and a double, this gives us 3, which is 1 dot, an odd number of dots. And again, a double and a single gives us 3, which is a single dot, an odd number, therefore a single dot. However, the particular system that I'm using enables us to add a little bit extra to this. And if we have a single tap here, a single dot here, and add it to another single here, this gives us 2 new taps, which I represent as circles rather than as spots or dots. If we add 2 old ones together, this gives us a 2 and a 2 gives us 4, which is an old 2. So I represent those with a darkened in dot. So these are just 2 taps at this level. Again, we have a 1 to start with and a 2 here, making 3, but it's a new 3 because we start with a single tap. So this gives us a new level 3 single tap, and again 2 here means that this added to this one gives us an old single tap, so again represented by just a dark fully filled in tap at that level. If anybody wants some further information about the calculation of the active transform, let me know, but suffice it to say that this active transform, Fortuna Major, Fortuna Major, is in the 4th house, and that's going to give us very important information for the reading. So, how do we set about interpreting the casting like this? Well, there are a number of ways that I suggest that you can approach something like this. It depends on your particular skills and experience, what direction you're coming into from your study of divination. But some people like to start with their astrological understanding. In this particular case, if we were looking at from an astrological point of view, we would consider that this gemstone, Amicio, represents Venus, the darker side of Venus, which is going to be interesting in terms of the 6th house. There's obviously some feminine influence associated with this, or perhaps a more creative influence associated with this. In the 6th house, we're looking at things like duty, responsibility, and so on, together with a number of other 6th house interpretations which we can draw on. But if you're approaching it from an astrological point of view, you're really starting to think at this stage, Venus in the 6th house, what does that mean? If you're looking at it again from an astrological point of view, and you see Saturn, therefore, Karcher, in the 5th house, you immediately start to think, oh, well, that's going to put a dampener on my social life and creativity. Interesting here in terms of what might be happening in terms of creativity, therefore. So you start to think, okay, well, Venus in the 6th, Saturn in the 5th, what can that possibly mean? You then start to think about the active transform in the 4th house. The 4th house is associated with our feelings of home, centeredness, our core, motherliness, which I'll say more about perhaps in a later video or later article. We think of it in terms of protectiveness. We think of this in terms of home. Is a very important concept for us here, and we're thinking of this in terms of Fortuna Major, Fortuna Major, and its equivalent, the sun. What does that say for us in terms of this? Now you can see from the interpretation that we had before that this is a continuing flow. I'll say more about that in a moment. This is a continuing flow because we've got the same number of double taps all the way through between the 1st and the 2nd geo. Interestingly, the active transform also has 2 taps in it. So this is a continuing flow. Now what a continuing flow is indicating is that the overall energy, so say, the overall feeling, the overall intensity, the overall situation is not changing that much. However, our perspective on the situation is going to change. Now, why I say it's interesting in that we go through this is that we see the number of double taps here going through here, and we notice that at level 2, this is the 1st level, this is the 2nd, 3rd and 4th level. At level 2, the number of taps is staying the same. And they're all old taps, which is very interesting because it means that the thought process that we have internally is going to stay more or less consistent. It means that our ideas, our views are going to remain consistent. It means that our plans are going to be well formed and continue in a straightforward kind of way. So any thoughts that we have, any plans and ideas are a common thread going through this. Now it doesn't always happen with the geomes by any manner of means, and you have to work with that. It's just in this situation the kind of golden thread going through this reading is going to be the anchor point. Going through our reading is going to be that our thoughts, our plans and ideas are not invariate, they're not changing, but we have a good backbone. Our ideas and our plans are constant, continuing, are a source of useful development for us. They are something we can keep referring back to. We should keep our thoughts in order, don't deviate, given what else is happening in the flow. So, the next thing that we would do then is to think about, that's purely from an astrological point of view, shading into a geomantic point of view. The next thing we need to do is to look in more detail as to what the geomes are actually saying here. Now the way that I do this is to, and this is only one of a number of ways I could possibly do it, but this is my preferred way of doing it, certainly for a weekly casting, is to say, what do these taps mean going from one house, going from one geome to another in respect of the house? So what are we seeing here? We're seeing that our ideas are staying fairly constant, and that what's going to happen is that this layer, the fourth layer, is going to change. The fourth layer is going to condense. The fourth layer is being expressed here, because it's two taps, it's being expressed outwards. Now what does expressed outwards, what does a physical expressed outwards mean in terms of the sixth house? Well, generally we're going to start thinking in terms of the details of the service that we can represent. How do you arrive at that? Well, if you think of all the things that the sixth house can represent, then duty, responsibility, our ability to connect, to find the differences in detail, to put things right, all associated generally with Virgo in the sixth house. These are all expressions of things that you can do externally. Now, if you were to say, what would it be? If it was just mental, which we'll do in a moment, the mental idea is being expressed. The mental idea is to say, very clear on what you need to do. So the second level in the geome is being expressed, and the second level is all about what you do internally, mentally. So what does a mental expression mean? The level 2, mental, is being expressed in terms of the sixth house, and how does it relate to what else is being expressed? The fourth house. It's saying you've got some very clear ideas on what you want to do to bring about some form of sympathy, some form of closure, some form of responsibility, some form of duty. In other words, it seems to me from this that we're seeing that you have a very clear idea on how you can and should be serving yourself and other people at this time. You've got a very clear idea on what you want to do. Carrying on, the flow is going to continue to be the same, but what we notice is that effectively Karcher is identical to Amicio, except these two taps have now effectively jumped up to level 2. So what does this mean? It means that, keeping this in mind, we've got these clear ideas for how we want to serve others. It means that we're going to have to translate that into internal physical resources for ourselves. It's going from what needs to be done externally, expressively, to what resources we need to bring to this. So this idea of the mental idea being constant means that we've got our ideas of what we need to do, and we are trying to bring those about in the external world. However, that's closing down. But what is opening up is our internal resources. So one possible interpretation of this, just going from these two taps at level 4 to now two taps at level 3, is to say, while everything is still staying relatively the same, remember it's a continuing flow, we can also see that our focus is changing from the external to the internal. It's changing from the external here, level 4, to the internal at level 3. So this is saying maybe we've tried to push out, now we realise perhaps we've been wasting our time a little bit. If we think it through and keep our ideas straight, then what we need to do is to pull in all the effort we've been pushing on outside, and we really need to start bringing this internal to say, you know, let's get the resources here, let's check to make sure that we can do what we need to do, that we've got everything that we need to do. Now, this is in the 5th house. It's associated with Saturn, Karcher. Okay? This is saying there's some form of restriction. This is going to be bringing in, you can see how the energy is more dissipated in Amicio. It's being brought in towards the centre. It's not being either level 1 or level 4 expressed externally. We need to bring it in towards ourselves, bring our actions and our thoughts together in the 5th house. So it's likely to be putting a bit of a kibosh on our social developments, maybe our creativity, maybe our expressivity. Maybe it's saying that what we need to do at this situation is to bring things back. We've got these great ideas of serving other people. We need to bring these back and to give them some further thought. We need to stop putting ourselves out there quite so much and to bring our resources, bring our ideas, to pull back in without any loss of interest, without any loss of drive on our part. But we do need to make sure that we are focusing what we have and what we need to move forward in the right kind of way. We've been perhaps pushing out a little bit too far. The flow between these is telling us now it's time to actually bring this in. You might need a time, therefore, a little more focus, changing from the external delivery to more internal concentration. Let's carry this flow further forward. Now the flow further forward, as we remember, is taking Fortuna Major into the 4th house. Now the 4th house is associated with home, but it's also associated with our core. Now this is why it helps to have a broad range of understandings, meanings, interpretations for the charts and the houses and the planets and the geomes, because you can draw on a number of different meanings and interpretations, and that you just kind of feel your way for what in the possible interpretations is right under the circumstances. So while the 4th house is traditionally associated, maybe if you were doing a horary chart, very much associated with the home, very much associated with the house, the gardens, things underground. My feeling is, given what we're seeing here, given that this is more to do with actions that we do, external physical actions are being brought inside, it's more of a concentration, that instead of thinking about something physical we need to do with the house, or to do with underground things, which are all associated with the 4th house, we need instead to be thinking about another aspect of the 4th house, which is our core, our values, what we understand to be our true self, our maternal instincts, the idea to nurture, and so on and so forth. So now we see, very interestingly, what's happened is that what we had as 2 taps level 3, where we have this idea of bringing back, checking to make sure we've got the right kind of resources, is now elevated to 2 new taps. It's as though this line of 2 has stayed constant throughout, and we can see this progression from 2 at level 4 to now 2 at level 3 and flipping up to 2 at level 1. But these are 2 new taps. I'll say more about that in a moment. But you can see this kind of the story, another line going through this interpretation is that the 2 taps have moved all the way up through the geo and now come all the way up to level 1. But these are 2 new taps, which means that we need to think about applying, expressing mentally what we need to do in terms of our core values. So what this is inviting us to do is to say, okay, we need to focus less on we need to put less attention, less focus on what we're physically doing externally. We might wish to serve, but we're perhaps going too far in how we try to serve others. That's not doing us or perhaps them any good. We need to pull that back in. We need to pull it back in to make sure we've got the right kind of resources. Are we applying ourselves in the right kind of way, in the right time, to the right kind of degree? We're going to need to think about that as the week progresses. That's how the flow is going to go. Maybe we don't meet with the right kind of appreciation. Maybe we need to just pull back ourselves and say, hang on a minute, things aren't working here, I need to think this through a little more. My ideas are right, but how I'm developing this needs to be thought through. And therefore, as we move to the active transform, we can say, okay, my ideas are right, and there is a residual here, there's a new tap at level 3, which means actually I have learnt something here, but I've learnt I need to grow. That's what new single taps are about. Okay, I need to grow, I need to develop, there's something I need to do about this, and probably there's a lesson to be learned from this, to say, actually having thought about it, it would help if I tweaked something, it would help if I enhanced something, it would help if I grew something. I'm not clear on exactly what that is at the moment. That's maybe, you know, what's coming in the next week, but there is something, there's a lesson here to be learned about something that you need to grow. So what it's saying is that now the focus has changed to level 1, where we're thinking about 2 new taps, and 2 new taps at level 1 is all about applying something new mentally. It's about connecting with others mentally, of seeing where we want to go. So as soon as you say that, as soon as you see mentally where you want to go, you can start to see how the whole interpretation can be brought together. And the way we can bring the whole interpretation together is by looking for those chunks of story to come together, to see, hang on a minute, what we're seeing here is I've been trying to do too much, I've been trying to express myself, and maybe although my ideas are right, my heart's in the right kind of place, then what I need to do is to make sure that it's being applied in the right way. So maybe this is time for a bit of a pullback, to just do a bit of a fact find, a bit of an evaluation for my own sake, to find out whether what I'm doing is working and of being of real value to people. So we go from the first geome, then to the second geome, and the second geome saying, actually pull it back in, think very carefully about what you're doing, make sure that your resources are tip top, because as much as the flow is continuing, this is the time to bring those resources in and say, are we right here? Have we got everything that we need? Check your list, because what has been right in terms of a plan may be being changed in its implementation. So whilst your heart's in the right place, you've got the right kind of ideas, the right intention and so forth, it may not be working because of how it's being expressed. That's why we're getting the shift upwards through the geo. So nothing fundamental needs to change in your plans, or your projects, or your contacts with other people. What you're trying to achieve is fine. What we're talking about now is a fine-tuning. That's why the flow is saying it's a continuation. What you need to continue is your thoughts and ideas. As I say, your heart's in the right place. What you're trying to achieve is fine. You just need to make sure that the execution is working as well as it needs to. So stop expressing so much externally, bring it back into yourself and say, are my tools right? Is this chisel sharp? Is the way I'm saying things working? Evaluate. This is the time for reflection. Okay? And as you move to the active transform, which is the key part of this, is to say, actually, yeah, there is something I do need to change. There is a lesson to be learnt here. There's something I need to grow. There will be something you'll need to tweak. If you're following the flow through, if you're living according to the geomantic way, you will feel this. To actually realise, yeah, there's something you need to tweak. There's some resource. That's why you've got a single new tap at level 3. There is something about your resource you need to go back and revisit and tweak to be more appropriate. Only then will you be able to connect with your higher ideals of how best you want to explain and express what you want to do. So that's why we have these 2 new taps at level 1 in the 4th house. Reconnect with what's actually inspiring and visionary towards you, connecting with other people. That's what those 2 new taps are saying. Focus on not just your good ideas, but exciting those in other people. Find out how you can connect with them and they can connect with you mentally. It's not just about expressing yourself. You've got all the energy in the world. However, you need to make sure it's applied truly and accurately to express your much overused word, passion, to make sure you're connecting with both your inner drive and what you're seeking to do, to make your dreams come alive, this core about what you're about and what you want to achieve over the coming period of time, whatever projects you're working on, those need to be explored and expressed accurately and inspiringly. You need to be re-inspired by your own ideas. You need to reconnect and say, I've tried to do things, let me think about, are those working? Yeah, I realise now I've got a tweak to do. The way best you can find forward is to that and say, what fundamentally in my core really inspires me about doing this? I've got good ideas about how to do it, but I need that electric spark of intuition to help me realise and connect with other people. You can only really do that by the fourth house, saying reconnect with your core. Find out what's really vital for you. Vital in the sense of bringing vitality and animation, because that's where the active transform is. That's where the flow is going to go. You can hitch on to that rising tide of the flow and use that to your advantage to say, now is the time when it's going to be easy for me to reconnect with my higher ideals, to refresh myself, to find out how best I can take my ideas going forward. And that's what we would see for the forthcoming week. I'd be interested in your questions. Any questions about the reading or the process or the interpretation, then let me know. And I sincerely hope you have a fantastic week. Take care. Bye for now.